Well, hey, it's me again, and it's great to see all of you again. And again, welcome to North Shore. Those of you in this room, I want to say hi to everybody who may be joining us online or in a different part of the world. Life doesn't always go the way you plan it, does it? And I was thinking as we've been talking through Kiki's transition and that part of her story, it kind of reminded me of my transition to come to this place and our family moving here almost 9 years ago. Arriving in a new city, in a new state, in a new place with new people, and just, how long it took to get settled in and find our way around, and not just around the church, but around the area. And by the way, I'm just a little tangent here. If I can speak for all the other transplants to this part of the world, the numerical street naming thing has got to go. Okay, it's entirely confusing because if someone says, by the way, meet me for lunch on 85th, I have no idea where to go because if I look up 85th, I've got 6 different options about where I may go. There's a northeast in Bellevue, a southeast in Woodinville. Even though Woodinville is north of Bellevue, I don't get that. There's a northwest in Ballard or west in Edmonds. There's a southeast 85th Street in Mercer Island. And get this, there's a northeast 85th in northeast Seattle and Kirkland, even though there's a huge lake in between those two places. So this is just my word to the people out there that have any say. If we can just get this sort of sorted out, that would be great. Anyway, my point is by the time I got this figured out and got settled in the church and begin to carve out a plan for where we were going to go and how the church was going to move and what we were going to be about, within a few months of setting out on this new vision that we set out for on our 50th anniversary, 2020 happened. Anybody remember 2020, right? Something? Which is just to say, not everything in life goes the way you plan or turns out the way that you hope. You know, that small home improvement project that turns into 10 bigger ones when you set out on it, or the flight that gets canceled right before that much needed getaway or vacation, or the cake for your kid's birthday that was supposed to look like this, but then when you went after it, it turned out looking like that. By the way, this is why I don't bake, okay? It never works out for me. We can all laugh when it's a baking fail, but it's a whole other story when it's your career or your health or your marriage or your dream for your future. Maybe you thought you'd be married by now or still married by now. Maybe you thought that job was finally the one. Maybe you thought you would have kids by now or that you'd be closer to your adult kids. Maybe you thought you'd have enough money to go ahead and retire. Maybe you thought, other people had the health problems, not you. Maybe you thought you'd be living the life you planned, but instead you're living the life you got. And now you're thinking to yourself, this is not how my life was supposed to go. Anybody else ever been in this place or had this thought? By the way, if you haven't, you will someday. Because life has a funny way of not going the way we plan, not getting to the plan A that we've crafted and dreamed and hoped for all along. And I just want to say, if that's you, I think you're in the perfect place this morning to be because the Bible is filled with stories about detours and delays and difficulties. In fact, name me a character in the Bible whose life went according to plan. There isn't one. And that's especially true in the story we're going to explore together over the next 6 weeks, the story of this man in the Bible named Joseph. Now, I'm not talking about Joseph in the Christmas story, though let's be honest, his life didn't go to plan either, right? Nobody does. But Joseph from the Old Testament, the Joseph who, if you grew up going to Sunday school, is the guy with the coat of many colors, right? But what you may not know or remember about Joseph is that he didn't get the life he was planning either. His life went wildly off script. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold as a slave, wrongly accused of adultery, unfairly imprisoned for over a decade. In fact, at so many points in his life, he could have been saying, or he would have said, or he thought he had, this would have been kind of the banner for his life. This is not how my life was supposed to go. This wasn't it. But the great thing about the Joseph story is that we get to see the whole of his story, not just one incident, one challenge, one detour. In fact, spoiler alert, I'm going to turn to the end. We're going to look at the end of the story at the beginning. If you look, when Joseph is able to look back at all the pain and all the challenges and all the heartache and all the difficulty, he's able to say to the very brothers who sold them off as a slave, look at what he says. This is in the final sentences of the story of Joseph. Joseph says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And this is the reason, this is the heart behind this series that we're going to start this week, that while it may feel impossible given the moment you're in or how life has gone, while it may seem that God is absent and missing from your life, he's not actually absent at all. In fact, he's working in all kinds of ways that you simply cannot see yet. And God is able to turn even the most devastating situations, scenarios, circumstances into something that can be meant for good. And if you don't believe that, I'm so glad you're here, because there's a part of me as a pastor for the last 30 years that doesn't believe it either. But guess what? That's why we're going to walk through the story. So if you have a Bible with you or a Bible app on your phone, you can open to Genesis. That's the first book in the Bible, all the way back towards the beginning. We're going to start in chapter 37. This is also a great time to take out this little series booklet you were given on your way in. You're going to need this with you every week, not just to take notes, although I would encourage you to do that in there. But as you can see with each week, if you open it up, each week includes a daily Bible reading plan that will take you through the entire Joseph story one day at a time. Because the goal of this series isn't just to hear me talk about Joseph on Sunday and then go about your busy week. The goal is for you to hear from God through the story about what he wants to say to your story in your life. And if you walk through this one day at a time, I can promise you this: even if the messages are bad, God's goodness will speak into your life in profound ways. So we're going to read through the story together. And to help you stay on track, if you need a reminder, you can send us, you can receive a daily text that we'll send out. It will include a link to a short devotional video with some additional insights and reflections. And to sign up for that, just text the word "for good," one word, to 9700. That's also in the front of your booklet if you forget that. Anytime during the series, you can sign up for that, get those videos. And we're going to walk through this again one day at a time together. Because here's the thing about God: you can only really experience him and understand what he's doing one day at a time. But today, we're going to begin with the first chapter of Joseph's story, Genesis 37. We're going to kick it off right at the beginning, verse 1. Here's how the story begins. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. So first thing we got to start with, well, who is this guy? Why is he starting the story? Well, Jacob, who is the father of Joseph, is the grandson of a man named Abraham. Now, if you don't know who that is, Abraham is often referred to as the father of our faith. He's the man that God chose to carry this really significant promise. I'm going to actually read it to you. This is what God said to Abraham in Genesis, all the way back in chapter 12. He said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." In other words, you thought you were getting plan A. I got a whole different plan for you. But I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, of course, we now know this entire promise was pointing the way to the coming of Jesus. But long before Jesus, and long before the temple, and long before the law, and long before the people of Israel were a people, God was setting a plan in motion. In the midst of the chaos of human life, and Abraham had a chaotic life, and it was all kind of a mess, but he set this plan in motion that was all about redeeming the world and blessing the nations. So when the writer tells us we're going to talk about Jacob's family line, that's not just a genealogical detail. This is a reminder that God has a plan going. No matter what other plans we're going to encounter in this story, God's plan is the main one. Yes, he cares about your plan, and he wants you and I to flourish. But part of what we have to learn, and part of what we're reminded in the beginning of this story is, and part of why God allows us to experience detours, delays, difficulties, is that we're actually here to be part of God's plan, not vice versa. which is challenging, right? Because so many of us in some way treat God kind of like a genie in a bottle who exists for our sort of wish or dream fulfillment. But just the opposite is true. You were created in God's image to be an expression of his purposes, his plan, his agenda, his dream. In other words, for example, you're not just here to be a successful doctor, you're here to be part of the healing mission of Jesus. Not just here to be an electrician, you're here to bring light, the light of Jesus to dark places. You're not just here to be a stay-at-home parent, you're here to raise children to be agents of kingdom transformation so that the earth down here can look more like heaven up there. My point is, long before we get to the name Joseph, we get this subtle but really important reminder that we are all living, we are part of God's greater plan. Our plans aren't the main thing. You with me so far? Some of you checked out. It's like, I don't like this talk at all. I picked the wrong Sunday for church. Well, that's where we're starting. Okay, brings us to the first time we hear the name Joseph. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now, before we get to the bad report and the dynamic with the brothers, I just want to call out what we wouldn't hear, but that audience in that day would have noticed immediately is the shocking beginning or shocking introduction of Joseph as the first name in the story. You expect that because that's what the series is about, right? We're talking about Joseph. It's shocking, and it reveals a ton about this family's dysfunction that his name is mentioned first. So if you grab your series booklet and turn to the back page, there's a little family tree there for you. I'm going to throw it on the screen as well. You're going to need this throughout the series to make sense of it, but just want to call out a couple of things. First, notice that Joseph, who's on the far right there at the bottom, is number 11 of 12 sons. By the way, can you imagine having 12 boys in one home? I mean, I got one, and it's like a Ninjago war zone in my house. Okay? Imagine 12 of them running around. But Joseph, he's not the firstborn. He's not the oldest son. He's not the middle child. He's not the youngest. In fact, he doesn't fit on any of the birth order theories. He doesn't fit anywhere in that stuff. He's 11 out of 12, which means he is not in line to receive his father's blessing or be first. That should be number one, Reuben. And if you know how the story, how the story ends, the messianic line, the line through which Jesus comes, doesn't come through Joseph. It comes through number 4, Judah. In other words, the plan from God was never to be the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. So why are we reading about this guy? Why does his name come up? Why is this story even here? Let's keep reading. It says, now Israel is just the name God gave Jacob. So Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Now, why does he love Joseph more than any of his other sons? Well, in part, it mentions his old age, and that's part of it. But there's more to the story than just that. Let's get the family tree back on the slide. Now, notice Joseph is the firstborn son of who? All the way to the right. Firstborn son of Rachel. Well, who's Rachel? Well, Rachel just so happens to be Jacob's first love. I mean, it's a complicated family. This is his first love. He fell in love with Rachel first. But then, if you know the story, Jacob was tricked into marrying Rachel's sister, Leah, on the far left, by none other than her father. Way to go, Dad. Great move. And it's kind of crazy family situation. But Jacob never stopped loving Rachel. In fact, he eventually married her 7 years later, but then they struggled to have children. So Jacob had 4 kids with Leah, then 2 kids with Bilhah, Rachel's servant, then 2 kids with Zilpah, Leah's servant, then 2 more kids with Leah. By the way, if you think your seating chart for Thanksgiving dinner is complicated, can you imagine like how this is gonna work? It's crazy, right? And just to name it, kind of in all seriousness, this kind of polygamous family situation isn't in the Bible because it's God's plan for families. It's in the Bible because this was the normal practice in that culture in that time. And in fact, early on in the book of Genesis, where we find that polygamy emerges as one of the consequences of the fall, along with things like patriarchy, slavery, and violence. But after having all these sons with 3 other wives, when he was really old, Jacob and Rachel have 2 sons. The firstborn son of his first love is who? Joseph. At last. This is why Jacob loved him more than all the other kids. And it's why Jacob was given superior status in the family over his brothers. By the way, that's what the coat of many colors or the ornate robe is all about. By the way, the Hebrew here is almost impossible to translate. So scholars don't know if it was a coat of many colors or a long sleeve tunic. They're not sure. What they know for sure is this robe is about status, not fashion. In other words, he's given the robe that signifies or signals authority in the family over his brothers. Another example of this in the Bible, if you know the story of the prodigal son, when the prodigal son returns home and the father puts what? The best robe on him, signaling he carries the family authority, his father's authority, even over his older brother who's been working in the field, which is why the older brother came back and was so mad about it. And it's why Joseph's brothers were so mad at him and could not speak a kind word to him. And by the way, pause, I'm guessing as I get into this kind of crazy, chaotic family situation, some of you can relate to being part of a messy family, right? Maybe you grew up in a home where there was favoritism or sibling rivalries or manipulative behavior. And I just got to name, so much of the pain we carry comes from home, doesn't it? Even really good homes, because your parents or grandparents or caretakers, caregivers, guess what? They're broken people, and their parents were broken people, and their parents were broken people, and on it goes. But one of the takeaways I just want to call out here before we get any further, one of the things I just want you to kind of lodge away in your mind and keep with you is that just because a family is damaged doesn't mean the story is finished. Just because your family is damaged doesn't mean your story is finished. Like this story of God's power and his work and his providence, it's just getting started. But if I know anything about siblings from both being one and raising 2, the first thing you do when your siblings are really mad at you and they're really angry is tell them something that makes them even angrier, right? Let's get to what he does next. This is great. Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. Now, he actually has 2 dreams, and they're kind of wild and bizarre. You're going to read about them tomorrow in your Bible reading plan, which you're all going to do, by the way. I know you will. I found this online, kind of an interesting way to try to visualize it. There were these 11 sheaves of grain that were bowing down to Joseph that symbolized his 11 brothers in some way bowing to him. The second dream was of 11 stars and the sun and the moon bowing to Joseph, signifying his father and mother and 11 brothers bowing to him. So it was sort of this complicated, dreams are weird, right? Like these weird things. He tells it to his brothers, he tells it to his father. And it says, when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? And of course, if you know the story, his brothers do this, don't they? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Now, what no one knows in the story is that this bowing picture isn't about worshiping Joseph or even about his authority over them. In fact, he already had authority over his brothers. His father gave it to him. That's why they were so mad. These dreams are a prophetic picture of actually how this broken family is going to be repaired. How God's going to work this miraculous story through all these crazy circumstances to bring healing and reconciliation and new life after years of sorrow and regret. But of course, they can't see it. And Joseph, in spite of his dream interpreting skills that we're going to see later in the story, he doesn't get it either. He's kind of a 17-year-old, kind of naive. And I think the reason he misses this moment, even though he's, again, has the gift of interpretation of dreams, it's because his life up until this moment had been pretty much perfect. And here's the challenge when it comes to plan A, perfect life, I'm comfortable, everything's going to plan. One of the challenges is, in those situations, it makes it easy to misunderstand God. We think when everything goes to plan, it's I'll see God clear, but it actually makes it easy to misunderstand. It can reinforce the idea that God exists to meet my needs, fulfill my wishes. So Joseph misses. And he comes to his brothers, he tells the dream, he's kind of prodding them, he's kind of poking them, hey, guess what, I had this dream, it's probably gonna come true, you're all gonna bow down. No one kind of gets the actual meaning of it. But this moment of immaturity, this moment of sibling rivalry, it may reflect in some ways poorly on all of them, but what happens next to Joseph doesn't fit the crime. Because sometime later, his father is going to send Joseph back out in the field because remember, he's got the robe, he's got the clipboard, he's making the reports. He sends him out to check on his brothers. They see him coming, and I'm going to read you a fair bit of the story so you can experience what happens for yourself. Joseph's on his way. They see him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When remember Reuben's the firstborn, he's the oldest, heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Now, Reuben said this so he could go and rescue him later and take him back to his father. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe he was wearing. They took him and threw him into the cistern. It was empty, no water in it. So he's just going to be down there and basically starve to death. And they sat down to eat their meal. They just threw them in the cistern and now they've got Chick-fil-A. They sit down and have their meal. We're happy, we're doing fine, no big deal. And they look up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, balm and myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. These are sales folks on a sales trip. Judah, this is another person, remember we saw his name. We're gonna come back to his later in the story. Judah said to his brothers, what will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver. That's the normal price in that day to sell someone as a slave to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. And then, of course, we're told they took his robe, they covered it in a goat's blood to make it look like an animal had killed him. They took that robe back to their father, who saw it and turned and grieved and would not be comforted. In fact, Jacob promised he would not stop grieving until he met his son in the grave. And that's the conclusion of the first chapter of Joseph's story. Joseph basically loses everything. His family, his status, his comfort, his dreams. Here comes the dreamer. All his dreams for the future gone. And yes, maybe he was acting immature. Maybe he was lording his authority over his brothers. But no, that doesn't mean he deserved this, right? There's no other way to describe this moment in the story other than to say this experience for Joseph was completely and utterly unfair. And I just want to pause and let this part of God's holy scripture, this story in our Bible, and this moment of deep injustice and unfairness, and just let it sink in. Because here's the thing. Some of you have had a dream that's been shattered, or a relationship that's been broken, or a part of your life that's been lost. And did you notice as we walk through the story, in fact, if you go back and read, and you're going to read this week, you go back and read Genesis 37, God is not mentioned once in this chapter of the story. And it's not because he's absent. We're going to see next week, God is very much present and becomes more and more present. But it feels like he is. Feels like he's not there. Isn't this part of why it feels so wrong and so unjust? Because isn't God supposed to be one who intervenes and cares for you and stops bad things from happening to you? Isn't God supposed to be the one who says, no, 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 you're gonna get plan A because you're my son, you're my daughter whom I love, and I wanna make sure you get the plan you want, and we'll keep this from happening. See, that's the question that so many of us live in or discover when we hit that moment and we say, this is not how my life was supposed to go. That's the question that comes when you're part of what we're gonna call in this series, the fellowship of the shattered dream. The fellowship of a life gone off script. You know, the children that you may never have, or the career that may never come to be, or the good health that may never return, or that hurt that may never fully heal. And the hard news that we start with as we kick this series off, and we're gonna learn a lot about this, the hard news is redemption doesn't necessarily mean getting plan A back. In fact, Joseph will never live his plan A again. He will never again wear that ornate robe. He will never again bring back a report to his father. He will never again return to his home. He will never again sleep in his bed. He doesn't get plan A. But here's what I want you to know, and here's where the story's going, and here's where the series is going. Just because plan A is gone doesn't mean God's plan is missing or his purposes have been thwarted in your life. In fact, what Joseph is about to discover is that God mysteriously is gonna be far more present now in his life than ever before. We're gonna see that in real clearly next week. And not only that, what's gonna happen is we're gonna see that this moment where his dream is shattered, where everything falls apart, becomes the very pathway that's gonna save not just his family, but that family line, that greater promise, that greater plan that moves the world closer to Jesus. But Joseph, in this moment of the story, he can't see that at all. It'd be like for him, it's like he'd be looking at like one piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle and looking at going like, how does this make sense? What is this picture of? How can I make sense of it? When the only way to see it is to have all the pieces together, the whole picture put together the right way. And maybe that's a moment that you're in right now where you're looking at that one puzzle piece, that one part of your life that's gone wildly off script and you can't make sense of it. And now you have to remember God sees the whole picture, even if you can't see it yet. There's a couple here in our church who serve in our divorce care ministry who are willing to share a little bit of their stories with us about losing that plan A and then discovering a greater plan at work beneath it all. So take a look at the screens.
Hi, I'm Ryan.
I'm Kendall, and we've been married for 7 years.
I was previously married for 16 years, 2 wonderful children. The marriage in the beginning was excellent. Ultimately, the marriage succumbed to a whole host of challenges that were difficult to navigate, and the marriage broke apart. The divorce was 6 years. It was very painful. I faced some extraordinarily dark circumstances with regards to legal challenges, financial ruin, just the pain of loss. I felt crushed. I felt devastated. It seemed as though the harder I tried to hold things together, the worse things seemed to spin out of control.
I was previously married. Was married for almost 11 years. We had good times together. I didn't think it would end, but we grew apart and issues happened within the marriage. We ended up divorcing a couple of years later, and that was a rough time. Just feeling completely lost. I had this, this dream. This was to be the person that I was to be living with and married to for the rest of my life, and how could the dream die?
For me to be able to join a divorce care group, it was about having a community of people that understood what I was going through. I mean, a lot of times you're talking about things like not being able to get sleep, massive anxiety. You're talking about financial strain that is almost unimaginable. The ability to go through a divorce care class and be in a community of care, so to speak, that was a experience for me that was absolutely necessary in the process of being able to get through a divorce. I went through divorce care and connected with North Shore and found a way to persevere and build relationships and to find ways through challenging circumstances. I was planted in the Lord and God pulled me through it.
Ryan and I have been married 7 years. We've both grown, we've both supported each other through really tough, dark times, but it's been a really good relationship. And he is a man of God, and it's been wonderful to be led and to partner with a man of God.
There are many dark and challenging days through a divorce and separation, but you definitely have to keep your eye on the notion that God is with you, that God will plant you in another spot, that God loves you. There are people that care. There are people that you can become a community of. God has brighter days ahead for you, definitely.
What a great reminder, and a vulnerable one, that there's life after plan A. Whether it's a divorce or a diagnosis or a devastating loss, God simply refuses to let sin and brokenness have the last word, doesn't he? Doesn't always prevent it, doesn't always stop it, certainly doesn't cause it, but he refuses to let it have the last word. I also just want to name, if you're walking through a situation and you need support or care, there are groups here like Divorce Care or Grief Share, things like, some of those are going to kick off this week, that you can plug into and kind of be part, to discover that fellowship with a shattered dream, to walk with other people. You don't want to walk through this alone. But one more story that I'm going to close for this week. We'll pick it up again next week. Some of you know the great violinist Isaac Perlman. He lived with mobility limitations throughout his life from contracting polio when he was 4 years old. So he knew something about losing plan A. But there's a story about Perlman. He was playing a concert once and one of his strings broke during the concert, and he had the conductor keep going. And he said, keep playing. And he began to play with three strings. He retuned and modulated and kind of recomposed as he went, made this beautiful display of music in spite of that string that broke. And afterwards, the audience stood, gave him a standing ovation, and then he stepped to the mic, and Perlman said these remarkable words. He said, "It is my gift and my joy to make music with what remains." Friends, that's the God of the Bible. When a stream breaks, when a dream dies, when life goes off script, it is his gift and his joy to make music with what remains. How do I know? Because that's the story of Joseph. And by the way, that's the story of Jesus, right? Who was also betrayed by those closest to him. He was also accused of wrongs he didn't commit, and then was executed on a cross. But somehow in God's great plan, he used the worst moment for good. In fact, Jesus could have quoted Joseph on that cross. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done. The saving of many lives." That's the cross. Not plan A, but such a better plan. And that's where we're going to pick up the story next week, with Joseph not making a bad report about his brothers, but someone making a bad report about him. And his life gets even tougher, but he's going to discover something even more profound about the presence of God with him in it. But now let me pray for you, and then we'll close with one last song. Jesus, we stand or gather today in the tension of the detours and the disruptions and the disappointments and the difficulties. Many of us are staring at the loss of plan A. We find ourselves today in the fellowship of the shattered dream, a life gone off script. This is not how my life was supposed to go. And yet it's in the mystery of these moments, as painful as they are, that you begin to reveal yourself and your work and your greater plan in ways that we couldn't or wouldn't otherwise see. And so I pray over our church family this week that we would all experience the presence of your plan, the presence of your promise, the presence of your purposes in the midst of that strange puzzle piece we're trying to sort out right now. That we would begin to discover that great truth that it is your gift and your joy to make music with whatever remains in our life through whatever seasons and circumstances. Jesus, help us trust you today and follow you today, know you today, be with you today as you do this amazing work of redemption in our life. You, Jesus, are the great way maker when there is no other way. You're the plan starter when our plan falls apart. You're the dream maker when our dreams get shattered. Make that true in each of us today and every day as we walk through this series together. And we pray this in your name, Jesus, and everybody said, amen.